and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. As President-elect Donald Trump prepares to return to the White House, he has filled key national security positions to implement his vision of the U.S. role in the world. Today, we look at how the second Trump presidency will affect South Korea, as well as the latest on the North Korean involvement in the war in Ukraine.
It's always nice to win. A lot of good friends in this room. So you know we had like historic kind of numbers, especially for the president, but we won't get into that.
Because together with Donald Trump, we are going to make America not just great, but greater than it has ever been before.
Shipbuilding expertise and the ability to do it at scale outside of China sits in Japan and South Korea.
Russian forces have trained the DPRK soldiers in artillery, in UAV and basic infantry operations, including trench clearing.
In the studio with me, Dr. Andrew Yeo, Korea Chair at the Brookings Institution. Dr. Yeo is also a professor of politics at the Catholic University of America. His latest book is State, Society, and Market in North Korea. Also joining us, Mr. Robert Peters, the Nuclear Deterrence and Missile Defense Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Peters served as the lead strategist at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. He was also the special advisor for countering weapons of mass destruction in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Welcome to the program.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Now, Dr. Yeo, U.S. and South Korean authorities have confirmed that North Korean soldiers are now engaged in combat operations against Ukrainian forces. While the North Koreans were still being trained in Russia, there was speculation that they could just play a supportive role. How significant is this development that North Koreans are now directly involved in combat operations?
Well, there's significance on a few different levels. At the tactical level, you have North Korean troops in the Kursk region of Russia, where the Ukrainians currently hold territory. So it's possible that with the additional 10,000 troops, the Russians may be able to push out the Ukrainians. So that's certainly a concern. At the regional level, if we look at the Indo-Pacific, what is North Korea getting in return for this? And we have to assume, in some cases the worst, that they're probably getting military and receiving military and technical assistance that can help improve their missile, their rocket capabilities. And so that's certainly a concern for Northeast Asia, for South Korea, for Japan. And then lastly, there's the global implications of deepening North Korea-Russia ties. We saw the ratification of their defense treaty. But if North Korea and Russia are successful in pushing out the Ukrainians, this would be a huge, not just a tactical victory, but a PR win for these two countries to demonstrate strengthening ties between these two countries and what they want to see as the undermining of Western influence.
And Mr. Peters, in a meeting between Lavrov and Chesony, Russia publicly supported North Korea's actions against the United States and its allies, and recently Moscow ratified the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement with North Korea. Are we at a point where Russia, permanent member of the UN Security Council, condoning North Korea's missile and nuclear development?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we are. And I think Andrew's correct, and I've spoken about this before, in that, you know, what is the quid pro quo for North Korea sending its forces into Ukraine to assist the Russians? The only thing of real value to North Korea that I think Russia's willing to give them would be technical assistance with their missile or even their nuclear miniaturization efforts, to be able to put warheads underneath the nose cones of ballistic missiles or cruise missiles that are more precise, more accurate, and more reliable. And so I think we're beyond the point of Russia condoning North Korean missile tests or even nuclear tests. I think that we need to be prepared for a Russia that's working in concert with North Korea to modernize and advance their strategic programs, and further, that is willing to destabilize Northeast Asia. I mean, we really are at a point in which the authoritarians in Pyongyang, Moscow, and Beijing and also Tehran are working in concert to destabilize the free and open world order that's benefited the global democracies for the last 8 decades. And we need to recognize that.
And Dr. Yeo, how does China view the deeper military cooperation between North Korea and Russia? Some say China is nervous because their cooperation makes the region unstable and weakens China's influence over the Korean Peninsula, while others say that China could use that to its advantage in its competition with the United States, and that it could take advantage of the anti-American solidarity. Which makes more sense to you?
Sure. Well, I think it's possible to hold on to both positions. I mean, from Beijing's perspective, they are a bit nervous to see what the North Koreans and Russians are doing. And certainly strengthened North Korea-Russia ties means two things for Beijing. One is that relative to Russia, they have perhaps less influence, less leverage. But the second is that if Russians are supplying North Koreans with weapons, with increased technical capacity to develop their nuclear missile program, I mean, that's going to, from Beijing's perspective, that's going to destabilize the region. It just provides more of a rationale for U.S., Japan, Korea to strengthen their ties, and then also bring in NATO as well, too, as we see the linkages between the European and the Indo-Pacific theater. All of this is bad news for China. So they don't like to see, they're nervous about this development, but I think they're really in a wait and see approach because they're not actively stopping the Russians or the North Koreans, for that matter, from sending soldiers, sending weapons and munitions. And you're right that there is, beyond just the tactical level, I think China shares that desire to see U.S. influence diminished. They share this vision about moving towards a multipolar world that North Korea, Russia talks about. That's certainly China's long-term game, but I think they're in this wait-and-see approach at the moment.
Mr. Peters, do you see Russian fingerprint support in the latest North Korean ICBM launch of Hwasong-19, the new solid fuel kind?
So I don't think we've seen fingerprints in the sense of direct evidence that you can point to and say, yea, verily, this is Russian technology. And that's just the nature of, I don't think we've got that good of penetration into the North Korean program. What I say is that the logic is there for Russia to assist on their missile and nuclear program, as we've discussed. And I think if you look at the tempo and maturation of the North Korean missile program over the last 18 months, you can't dismiss that as being a significant possibility, that Russia is really helping North Korea expand its program, making sure that they've got a long-range ICBM with reliable nose cone that can ensure that it can shower targets over North America with multiple independent reentry vehicles. I mean, that's the missing component of the North Korean nuclear program. Russia, that's half-century-old technology to the Russians. They figured out how to do that in the 1970s with precision. And so, to me, just looking at the outside, we'd be fools to dismiss that. And I think that is the one thing that Russia could offer that could convince Pyongyang to give them 10,000 to 50,000 soldiers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Dr. Yeo, there is concern that South Korea is not only surrounded by nuclear powers, but now besieged by Russia and North Korea's military alliance. And Seoul and Washington say that the U.S. extended deterrence and South Korea's conventional power is the only solution. But with this evolving threat, is this enough?
I mean, for me, I've always been a firm commitment of U.S. Extended deterrence, saying that should be sufficient. I don't think South Korea going nuclear or returning U.S. tactical nuclear weapons actually changes South Korea's deterrence capabilities against North Korea on the nuclear front. It's really a question about political will and commitment, and that's why I think it's really important for the incoming Trump administration to really give assurances to South Korea that it remains committed to extended deterrence. It's not really, I think, the capabilities. So I think we could probably be doing more to help strengthen conventional deterrence, seeing that North Korea might also improve its capabilities with the training that it receives in Russia, the combat experience it might receive, the weapons that it might receive. But for me, I think extended deterrence is sufficient.
So I disagree with you, actually, in that the American commitment to South Korea has been there since 1950s, totally agree. the American nuclear umbrella is viable? Absolutely. But is it more credible to respond to nuclear aggression with a low-yield option that's generated within the theater, or a large nuclear warhead that was designed to, turn Soviet cities into glass during the Cold War, that's coming out of systems that are based in the continental United States? So you're talking about D5s off ballistic missile submarines. I would offer that having low-yield options that are generated within theater, that are more precise, with more discrete effect, is a far more credible nuclear deterrent, because that is the goal, to ensure that your deterrent is credible to your adversary, than a huge ballistic missile that has to potentially overfly Russia or parts of China in order to take down a target on North Korea with an enormous yield. And so that's my concern. Is I don't question the credibility or viability of America's strategic nuclear deterrent. But that deterrent was built for a different mission set than tactical employment of low-yield nuclear weapons. And that's why I do think we actually, personal view, we do need to reintroduce and think seriously about reintroducing American non-strategic nuclear weapons into South Korea.
So,
Dr. Ye, let me add to that, and then you can respond maybe. All those promises from the Biden administration over stronger extended deterrence, now that future is uncertain with the new administration coming in the United States. And I don't think anybody would believe, any American or Koreans would believe, that the Trump administration would sacrifice any American city over a South Korean city. In this situation, do you think extended deterrence still holds?
well, not if Trump is saying that he's going to remove forces. And I mean, that's where I think the words and rhetoric actually
But even
matter.
with the U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula, now we have the whole new strategic capability coming from North Korea over ICBM that can strike United States. And with the Trump administration not willing to sacrifice its U.S. city over Korean city, then Koreans will have doubts about U.S. extended deterrence.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I think the voices are going to only grow louder in South Korea about growing their own indigenous nuclear weapons, or maybe having the return of U.S. tactical nuclear weapons. But I'm trying to look at this from a broader picture of non-proliferation and what the implications means for returning tactical nuclear weapons to the region, for South Korea to go nuclear as well too. So perhaps in a very limited scale or window, redeploying tactical nuclear weapons may be the answer. That might be more credible, I think, and more practical in some sense than having a nuclear umbrella and launching missiles all the way from the continental United States. But we see now how these conflicts are really intertwined. And so how is China, how is Russia going to react? So it's, these are the risks and the benefits that you have to weigh. It'll be on the Trump administration to think about what those risks and benefits are. But for me, I think it's just unleashes a more dangerous world.
We should not dismiss those concerns. Those are valid concerns to think of. But the United States is not the ones who nuclearized East Asia. That's on North Korea and that's on China. That's on North Korea when they decided, after the United States withdrew its nuclear weapons in 1991 from South Korea, that they wanted their own nuclear capabilities. That's on China for building theater range, variable yield nuclear weapons that can target bases from Japan to Northern Australia and be able to target American ships that are under steam with a nuclear weapon. They're the ones that are introducing theater nuclear weapons into the theater. So given that, again, we have not had a theater nuclear capability within the region since 1991, this is simply us saying, boy, I don't know. I don't think our deterrent posture is credible given the change in threats coming out of Pyongyang and Beijing. And so if you say, well, it could be worse. Well, they're making it worse. They're the reason why the security environment is deteriorating. We've got commitments to American security and to our allies in South Korea and Japan.
Well, I don't disagree with that characterization. And I have this piece in Foreign Affairs that came out a few months ago with Amy Nelson about the new nuclear reality. And so in some ways, where we might actually agree is that there is a new nuclear reality, and in part because of what China and Russia, really China and their rapid modernization of nuclear forces, but what now Russia is doing as well too. And so we may have to rethink what deterrence looks like. In that piece, I said that we're moving in a direction where nuclear sharing may be more possible. That might be a new reality.
Yep.
The Republicans have been much more bullish in modernizing U.S. nuclear forces, perhaps even removing some of the limits because we have our hands tied as China's proliferating. But that might create new dynamics. So it could be a new reality. I'm certainly open to that, given the change in geopolitics. But it does make me nervous as someone who doesn't want to see more nuclear weapons proliferating. But if that's what it takes to prevent China or Russia now from getting ahead, that might be something we have to accept. But at the moment, I still want to preserve this idea of extended deterrence, and we'll have to wait and see once the Trump administration comes in.
Yeah, on that new reality, it's reported today that the Biden administration told the Trump administration transition team that the U.S. nuclear arsenal needs to be modernized and needs to be expanded in that employment strategy. Now let's move on. Mr. Peters, President-elect Trump has named key cabinet members, including Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State and Mike Waltz as the National Security Advisor. Both Rubio and Waltz expressed strong support for alliances and partnerships. And Rubio has sponsored many pieces of Korea legislation. How will their view shape Korea policy when President Trump has clearly shown skeptical views on alliances?
Well, I think some of President Trump's in his first term views on alliances, I think some of that may have been overblown. But I think that perhaps his views have evolved, and I think that the pick of Senator Rubio and Representative Waltz may be indicative of that. I mean, both those two men, as you correctly point out, see real value in America's alliances and partnerships. And, given everything that we've seen coming out from President-elect Trump's picks, you see a far greater focus on the Indo-Pacific, on security affairs within the region, and there's no way in which the United States will be able to ensure stability within the region without our allies. And so I think that the pick of Senator Rubio and Representative Waltz in particular are indicative of this.
And Dr. Yeo, Senator Rubio, for Korea watchers, is a very familiar face. He did a lot of Korea-related activities. How do you think that will shape the future Korea policy from the Trump administration?
From the standpoint of alliances in Asia, I think Rubio is an excellent choice. He's very firm on China. And on even North Korea issues, he's supported North Korean human rights legislation, supporting North Korean human rights. He's very concerned about North Korea's nuclear program. And so in that sense, I think he could be a voice for Trump in saying why we should sustain the U.S.-South Korea alliance. So from that perspective, and I think Rubio is a good choice.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Peters, in a congratulatory phone call after the election, President Trump expressed interest in working with South Korea in shipbuilding, especially naval shipbuilding, exports, and maintenance. And National Security Advisor nominee Mike Waltz has taken the position that the United States needs to work with Japan and South Korea to counter China in maritime domain in shipbuilding. What specific capabilities is the Trump administration looking for from South Korea, and how urgent is the need to boost the U.S. shipbuilding against China?
Well, I won't speak for President Trump's transition team, and I don't deign to know what they're thinking. What I'll give you my views is that we need more destroyers, we need more frigates, and we need more fast attack submarines. But we also need more oilers and more sea strategic lift. We need more munitions. And when you look at the shipbuilding industry in South Korea and to a lesser degree in Japan, I think there's a terrific opportunity there for the United States to partner with its allies to build ships that both nations need, Korea and the United States. And I think they're beyond simply shipbuilding. I think there's an opportunity there for munitions construction, for munitions that can be used by the American military, the South Korean military, and potentially the Japanese military. And so I think that you're already seeing this movement within the Biden administration. I think in the second Trump administration, you could expect this movement to accelerate. And I think there's a real opportunity to partner with South Korean industry to build some key ships that need to go into the American Navy.
And Dr. Yeo, South Korea is a top shipbuilding nation, often vying for a top spot with China. What strength can South Korea bring to the table?
Yes, so in terms of research and design, in terms of production and high quality but at a lower cost, I think that's what really South Korea brings to the table. And it's not that the U.S. doesn't have shipbuilding capabilities, but there's no way they can really catch up to this pace that China has brought their naval capacity and power to. And so it's really important, I think, for the United States to look at their allies, look at South Korea, also Japan as well, too, to try to improve their own ship capabilities, because we're going to fall really far behind.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Peters, what I've heard from experts is that do not look at issues separately when talking with the Trump administration, but come up with the whole package, like the defense, the burden sharing, and the shipbuilding capabilities, and direct investment into the United States. Is that the way to go for the Korean government when meeting with the new incoming Trump administration?
What I'd say is that if the United States' allies, wherever they are in the world, took security and defense issues as seriously as South Korea does, and having a very capable, well-equipped Army, advanced Air Force, a very robust defense industrial base, the shipbuilding capability, the bases, the geography, we wouldn't have nearly as many problems in the world if every nation from Europe to the Middle East to the Western Pacific took issues as seriously as South Korea does. And so I would package it and say, this is what we provide as a united alliance. This is how it benefits your nation. This is how it benefits our nation. And I think that's a really compelling narrative. And that'll fit in well with the increased focus on security issues in the Western Pacific that you're seeing from many members that are coming into President Trump's team.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Yeo, as we wrap up this discussion, what focus do you think South Koreans should be focusing as they prepare for the second Trump administration coming in?
Yeah, well, I think the South Koreans have already done their homework, and we were talking earlier about almost a fact sheet that's circulating among the Koreans to demonstrate what South Koreans have already committed to in this alliance relationship. On the economic side, we've seen in the last 3 years $116 billion in investments in the U.S. That's something that I think is helping a lot of local economies, providing jobs. That's something that they can bring to the Trump administration and discuss, continuing, perhaps even expanding. And I also think what we mentioned earlier on joint industrial production, there's already been some positive response from President-elect Trump, but we can expand this to other areas in terms of weapons, in terms of munitions, as Bob talked about. And also what South Korea can bring to the table in terms of the Indo-Pacific theater, the region. I know that South Korea has, they're very focused on North Korea, rightly so. It's in their backyard. Inter-Korea relations are important. But I think Trump, when he comes in, will be thinking about his U.S. allies and how they can be deployed in a conflict with China. And I think that's something that maybe the South Koreans need to be prepared for. President Yoon has already moved in that direction. He has an Indo-Pacific strategy. He's talked about the U.S., Japan, Korea trilateral, addressing broader issues beyond the Korean Peninsula. But I think there's room for both Trump and Yoon to work to show how the alliance can help defend South Korea, but also could be used to provide stability and security for the wider Indo-Pacific region.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Peters, Dr. Yeo, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.